everyone. Happy September, happy back to school, happy whatever your fall is bringing. It's been a while since I've done a longer video on here, so I wanted to make sure that I got to that this week. Before I get started with that content, I do want to plug what is going on over at Whole Body Healing. So we are really officially launching our family program. I could not be more excited about this. It feels sometimes like when you're working with adults with complex chronic illness that you are just putting out fires, right? Like smoldering fires that have been going for decades. And people still recover, of course. People still heal. I mean, watch my testimonials or my interviews playlist to hear some of these incredible stories of people. So you can recover at any age, but prevention, right? Prevention is key, like nipping that fire out when it is just like a little flame, right? Listening to the body early. And so I feel so passionate about launching the family program, and I have partnered with Suzanne Balestino. Not having kids myself, I felt like it was important to partner with not only a mother, but also a registered nurse who specializes in pediatrics. Suzanne is really special and really unique in her expertise in that she has been training with me with all of my holistic methods. She has taken her own daughter through the Rebuild Yourself protocols and seen just incredible results from it. But then she also understands the conventional medicine perspective, having been in nursing for decades. And so I am just thrilled to have her heading the family program. And the first thing we are launching is an 8-week intensive coaching program called Regain Control. So you're going to be meeting with there's going to be 5 families in this. You're going to be meeting with other families who are in similar situations. Doesn't matter how many kids you have, it's just per family. And you'll be doing group meetings weekly with Suzanne, following a curriculum, but then also getting individual sessions with her as well as a part of that program. So yeah, I'm so excited to launch this. If you go over to the Whole Body Healing with Jen website and you click on Family Program with Suzanne, the application will be there. So go ahead and get your discovery call booked so that you can figure out if you are a good fit. So I will be talking a little bit about some of the things we're going to be implementing in that program in the video today, because I am going to start going back and redoing some of my oldest videos. It's now been several years that I've been posting on this YouTube channel. I have hundreds of videos now, and all of it is gold. Honestly, I'm really proud of all the videos I've put out, but some of my earliest videos, I feel like at this point I can really redo and just add extra information and just get deeper into the content with now more years of experience and education. So the very first videos that I posted, well, I think I did like a coconut flour bread recipe tutorial and like a liver pate recipe tutorial and like a how to make your own soap recipe tutorial. So if you haven't scrolled all the way back and watched those, go for it. I'm not going to redo those recipe videos. Those are still good. But the other series of videos that were some of the first ones I put up were kind of a tutorial in terms of like my version of the GAPS protocol, or what I call a gut rebuilding protocol. And those videos are great. They stand the test of time. They've gotten a lot of views over the years. But I really wanted to redo this in maybe a more in-depth and clear and succinct way, and give a little bit of the history and the background as well, about why I focus on these dietary protocols, and why I became a GAPS practitioner, and why I have made kind of my own version of this protocol that I share with clients, and why that is. So let's see where we're at. So first of all, we have to understand the history of the specific carbohydrate diet, right? And this really starts with a pediatrician named Sydney Haas, who was treating very early cases of celiac disease. So it is not a coincidence that as the Industrial Revolution rolled out and people started eating more refined carbohydrates, more shelf-stable foods, refined seed oils started getting used because they were a byproduct of machinery lube in the Industrial Revolution. Like, this history is pretty dark. So children started getting symptoms of celiac disease, what we would now call celiac disease. It wasn't called that at that point, but basically very severe digestive distress that some children were getting, and some of them would actually die from the severity of their symptoms. And this pediatrician decided, after hypothesizing and observing and experimenting, realized, oh my gosh, these kids have complex carbohydrate intolerance. And he really believed that any long chain carbohydrates which would be the polysaccharides, right? It takes a lot of digestive oomph to break these down properly. And if you have an underlying infection in your digestive tract and you don't have that digestive strength, that digestive fire, that digestive power that a healthy person does, you're not properly breaking down these complex carbohydrates, and they are going through your digestive tract. They are inflaming the lining of your digestive tract. They're harming the villi, right? The little fingerlings that come out of the side of the gut lining. So they're just kind of wreaking havoc, and then they're getting into areas like these non-broken down carbohydrates are getting into areas where they really shouldn't be in the digestive tract, and the infections in there, the bacteria, the parasites, the fungus in there that maybe is already overgrown, is just having a field day. It's just feasting on these not totally broken down carbohydrates, and it's breaking them down for you. It's eating them, but they're proliferating, they're growing, right? So it's feeding these underlying infections. So he put these kids on a chicken breast and banana diet. There's a little more to it than that, but those were the main staples of the diet because he really believed that carbohydrates were important for kids' development, but they couldn't have any complex carbohydrates, so bananas have very little fiber. There's like really no polysaccharides in a ripe banana. It's really just broken down very quickly into glucose and fructose. So he had the kids eating mostly bananas and lean meat. And kids were resolving their symptoms, like kids were living. He also did a lot of things in terms of cleansing the digestive tract, like he would have the kids take shots of castor oil, he would have them do enemas regularly. So he did do more things on top of this, but this was the base of the diet where he was like, okay, we need to cut out the complex carbohydrates. And he really was made a huge difference in hundreds of kids' lives. And unfortunately, his protocol really fell out of favor when they discovered gluten, and celiac disease came more officially diagnosed as gluten intolerance. I think there's a lot of evidence that that's not actually accurate. Obviously, gluten tends to be the most inflammatory complex carbohydrate, so people with damaged digestive tracts are going to have the most trouble with gluten. That's why a lot of people do get relief from their symptoms when they cut gluten out of the diet, but truly the issue is in all complex carbohydrates. And this is not saying that complex carbohydrates are bad. I think that is super, super important to emphasize. People have been eating grains for thousands of years. I mean, even in hunter-gatherer societies, sometimes they will gather like wild rice or other grains. I mean, they don't make up nearly as much of the diet as agricultural populations, but we have been eating tubers, right, that are complex carbohydrates, like fruits like plantains that have complex carbohydrates. Like, these are dietary staples all over the world, so it's not the complex carbohydrate that's bad. It is simply the fact that in the modern world, the way we've been raised, and unfortunately with the decline of the health of the microbiome and the immune system over time, a lot of people just don't have the capacity to break these down properly anymore, and so they need to be eliminated at least for a period of time consecutively to allow for the healing of the digestive tract and to allow some time to kind of regain some digestive fire and oomph to break these down properly. Some people find relief eliminating these long term, and that's totally fine too, but I would say most people can add them back, in moderation at some point if they've really done the deep healing work. But it's just a really important concept to understand, and this is why not everyone gets relief from a gluten-free diet, or even from a paleo diet, or even sometimes from like a keto or low-carb diet, depending on what carbohydrates they're still including, right? And unfortunately, the concept of specific carbohydrate diet isn't super well known, so people are going low carb or, like I said, gluten-free, thinking that it's going to help them, but they haven't actually eliminated all the complex carbohydrates, and they may have an intolerance to all complex carbohydrates. So it's just a really important concept to understand. The person who next popularized this was Elaine Gotcha, who was a biochemist whose daughter had a really terrible case of colitis that she just could not get on top of. This was more in the 70s and 80s, I think. And she found the specific carbohydrate research, and she started applying the principles to her daughter. And she started saying, like, okay, this chicken and banana diet is very restrictive. It probably doesn't need to be this intense. So she, as a biochemist, started testing different carbohydrates against bacteria, right? And started seeing, like, okay, when these aren't broken down properly, which ones feed bacteria and which don't. And so she really started the master list that is what we would now consider the specific carbohydrate diet, where you can find lists online if you Google specific carbohydrate diet of what foods feed bacteria when they're not broken down properly and which ones don't. So that is going to be the most expansive parameters that you can follow and still eliminate the complex carbohydrates from your diet and hopefully get some relief and get some healing. And she started using this protocol. She wrote a book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle, I think it's called, that you can read. It's fantastic. And she started using this protocol with all sorts of digestive disorders that had been very stubborn and had, conventional medicine and had a difficult time resolving. Of course, as we're getting into the 70s and 80s, now we have a couple generations past World War II and the commodification of food, and we're seeing more digestive disorders popping up, right? And so a lot more people were developing things like ulcerative colitis and IBS, right, and diverticulitis, and these kinds of things, which are all very related conditions, and usually they all come down to chronic infections in the guts, right, that are inflaming the digestive tract, dampening that digestive fire, and making it difficult for people to break down the complex carbohydrates. So again, if you just want to really do a basic protocol to calm down digestive symptoms, the specific carbohydrate diet really stands the test of time. There's a ton of clinical studies. Actually, when I'm researching, diets and clinical trials around different medical diets, the specific carbohydrate diet has been tested a lot for people with these kinds of digestive disorders like colitis, and like really, really good success rates. Like usually 70-80% or more of people notice significant reductions in symptoms when they follow the principles of a basic specific carbohydrate diet. So really important to look into. But then we get in the 90s and early 2000s, Dr. Natasha Campell McBride, who founded the GAPS diet, which stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And she found the specific carbohydrate diet and all of this research. She's a neuroscientist and a medical doctor and a biochemist, so she has a very science biology background. She was familiar with a lot of the research that was done in the Soviet Union, where she comes from, around gut health and the microbiome. They were actually studying this stuff a lot, the scientists there, trying to kind of optimize the health of their population. So they were studying the microbiome long before scientists in the West were. So there's a ton of research that she was able to utilize from Russia. And she also really emphasized in her own research the importance of animal fats or saturated fat, and then cholesterol, of course, in healing the brain and the nervous system, because her focus was more the brain and the nervous system. And she started realizing that all these kids with neurological issues, right, maybe ADHD or autism, or severe tantrums or sensory sensitivities, emotional sensitivities, dyslexia, and even things like seizures and other really severe, maybe severe kind of hallucinations or delusions, all of these kinds of spectrum of psychiatric and neurological issues. Most of these people also had digestive issues, and the parents were complaining to her about very similar symptoms of like a lot of constipation or a lot of diarrhea or a lot of really strange smelling stool, or just they were always bloated or gassy, or they had really weird dietary kind of compulsions, like very specific types of picky eating behavior. So I will say that in my experience, not every single person with psychiatric and neurological issues has obvious gut and digestive symptoms, but most people do. And just because you don't have obvious digestive symptoms doesn't mean there's not stuff going on in your microbiome. It's managing in there with minimal inflammation, and the inflammation is really just showing up other places. But basically, Dr. Natasha made this connection, right, of, oh, the gut and the brain, right? The gut and the nervous system, the digestive system and the nervous system. And she started realizing that if you heal the digestive system using specific carbohydrate principles, you heal the brain and the nervous system too. And these children's significant issues that were also neurological and psychiatric just started resolving as their digestive system healed using specific carbohydrate principles. But Dr. Natasha also really was studying how important that the animal fats were for healing the nervous system and brain. When we're talking about the functioning of the brain and the nervous system, we need those fatty acids. They are so essential, and animal fats have them in the perfect ratio for our nervous tissue and for our brain tissue to heal and regenerate, as well as the collagen that is so important in actually healing the lining of the digestive tract. So she found that people had a lot more long-term resolution of symptoms if they really focused on the animal fats and the meat stocks in the diet. And so that's how the GAPS diet was developed. And I am a GAPS practitioner, and I find it profoundly powerful when you combine these ideas of an animal-based ancestral diet with the specific carbohydrate principles. Magical things can really happen. That being said, I would say that there are a few things that I think the GAPS diet overlooks. The GAPS diet traditionally doesn't really talk about the compounds in plants that can be additionally irritating for some people. And I think I'm talking about things like lectins and oxalates, which I have made videos about that you can look at. And honestly, it really is just a measure of how much damage there is. You see, as time has gone on, these diets have had to be more intense, more restrictive, and more intentional to get results. And I think this is just really the nature of the declining health of our population over time, that you're going to need more and more intensive interventions as people are born sicker and sicker and sicker. And this is really important. You know, this is why we're launching this family program, is because we want people to break that cycle, you know, because people are just being born more and more sick, more and more chronically ill, and developing these severe symptoms earlier and earlier on. And we just need to get on top of those as quickly as possible. Kids heal fast, you know, so if we can get in and we can do a diet that is based on the specific carbohydrate principles or based on the GAPS diet, we're going to really see big changes really quickly. So that being said, I've been mentored by McBride. I'm a nutritionist for dysautonomia program, and you know what she really has used is a low lectin and low oxalate version of the GAPS diet, as well as when we're dealing with significant neurological or psychiatric issues, getting people into therapeutic ketosis. So Mary Reddick has kind of shifted the focus, you know, where it's not just kind of the basic GAPS diet you will see lists for online, but we're getting even more dialed in to get better and better results. And so my protocols are very much based on those same principles. Basically, phase one of all these protocols, whether it's Mary Reddick's version or my version or the GAPS version, is that soup diet, right? So when we are first starting out, soup is healing. You guys, there's something magical about soup. And honestly, I work with people all the time who have maybe done the GAPS diet, you know, or they've looked at specific carbohydrate principles and done those for a period of time, but until they go through that phase one soup diet, sometimes like that is the thing that really changes things for people, right? That was how it was for me. Like, I spent a long time just kind of trucking along with these basic principles, but once I was able to go through that phase one, you know, stage one, it's called intro GAPS, you know, or Mary has a phase one in her protocol, and I, you know, we'll just call it kind of the soup diet for people as well. this is where you are eating basically short-cooked meat stock, the gelatinous meats, that you cooked the meat stock with, and depending on the person, some amount of low starch vegetables, right? So this depends on people's sensitivities. I always do it low lectin and low oxalate for people, especially if they have significant, symptoms. But for some people, it's only a few different types of vegetables. For some people, it's a little more expansive, but things like carrots, onions, broccoli, even mushrooms, garlic, radish. Again, it depends on people's specific sensitivities, but these are kind of the primary plants that we would boil very well or steam until very soft and include those in the soups as well, and add as much animal fat into that as tolerated. There's going to be fat when you make meat stock, just like on top, but adding ghee, adding extra beef fat or duck fat or chicken fat, it's just basically the more fat that your digestion can tolerate, the faster you will heal. Some people have to really ease into this if they have gallbladder issues or they get nauseated after they eat from all the fat. So, really it's okay to ease into this as slowly as you need to, but that is the ultimate goal, is to get as much fat and broth and collagenous meats in you as you can. As we go through that soup protocol, we can add in eggs. We can add in homemade yogurt, homemade sour cream, maybe some sauerkraut juice. So I have recipes for all of these things in my book, and you can look up on GAP's websites how to do all these things too. I do recommend A2 dairy because it's more easily digestible than the A1 proteins, which a lot of people have trouble breaking down when they don't have as much of that digestive oomph, right? So we do see differences in digestive capacity between the types of dairy. So you can look into that too. And then basically as we move forward, we just expand cooking methods. I did the soup diet for 3 months when I was healing. Mary Reddick did the soup diet for a year, I think, at least, when she was healing. I have a lot of people who, just kind of get into a groove with it and just do it for 4, 5, 6 months because it feels good and they can tell that they're healing. So there's no rush to get off it. I usually tell people at least a month. And this is longer, like when you read a lot of GAP's books or GAP's blogs, sometimes they'll say like, do it for a week or something like that. I don't think that's nearly long enough for most people. I always say minimum a month, but the longer you do it, the better. I really felt when my gut started sealing. I really started absorbing nutrients differently, and it was really, really powerful. I could just tell shifts were happening in the gut, and that's when I started moving on. And how you move on is you just start expanding your cooking methods. You start sauteing. You add more variety of veggies. Still low starch, but more variety of veggies. A lot of people like adding organ meats, like liver pate and things like that at this stage. You could add plant fats, right? Things like olive oil and coconut oil if you'd like to. Some people do well with some of those plant fats in the diet. Some people like to start juicing a little bit at this stage. I always try to keep that low oxalate because vegetable juices can get very high oxalate very quickly, and sometimes that can be a problem. So, trying to keep it fairly low oxalate, but it can be very hydrating to do some juicing. If you've done the yogurt and sour cream successfully, you could bring in some hard cheeses that have been well aged, ones that are compliant with specific carbohydrate principles. They've been fermented enough to get the lactose out. And after that, you just keep expanding, basically. So you restrict and you're very intentional and only eating very soft foods for a period of time to kind of reset everything. And then you just expand as you tolerate it, right? So there's no rush to go through this, but you can stay within specific carbohydrate principles and expand your diet a lot. So like things like nuts and seeds would probably be brought in next. I prefer ones, again, that are low oxalate and low lectin, so things like walnuts, macadamia, pecans, flax seeds. These are going to be the first nuts I'm going to encourage people to try introducing when they're ready. You can start roasting and grilling. You could bring in a little fruit at this point, a little bit of honey, maybe coconut products as well, coconut milk, coconut aminos, coconut flour, coconut manna. This can really expand, and you can start doing some baking at this point, low carbohydrate baking. And this is really like the biggest parameters when I'm talking about here is really like, this is where magic really keeps happening. And so as long as people can stay within these parameters I'm talking about right now, I see so much healing happening, right? So staying on this kind of diet for a year or 2 years, you know, with this level of expansiveness, like, be patient with your body, give it time, you know, like let everything really unfold. And once you really get into pretty solid remission, like maybe 75-80% of your symptoms are gone, you can try adding back some high lectin foods, try adding back some high oxalate foods, so things like more variety of nuts and seeds, maybe some sunflower seeds, maybe things like squash, maybe a little pepper or tomato, and see how you do with that, right? Some people like to bring in a little lentils. Those are a actually low starch legume. It's one of the only legumes that is low starch enough to be compliant with a specific carbohydrate diet. So some people like adding some lentils at that point, or adding maybe a little more greens. Like I usually don't have people do much like chard or kale because it's high oxalate. But at that point, if you're craving it, you know, and you're doing so much better, like try some on occasion and see how you do. And really you want to stay, you know, trying to introduce some of those plant toxins. Hopefully you've built enough resilience up, your body can handle them better now, right? It's not that those things are evil, you know, we just want to make sure your body is resilient enough. And then we transition off, right? So that's when we trial starting to bring those complex carbohydrates in. Because again, they're not bad, they're traditional foods. We just need low enough levels of chronic infection that your immune system has been strong enough. We've starved out some of those overgrowths for long enough, and we've gotten enough digestive oomph back, you know, by healing the gut, that you can handle some. So start with the easiest digested ones, which would be things like sweet potatoes or potatoes, cassava flour, plantains, maybe try some milk, right? Like raw A2 milk ideally, but see if you can break down that lactose now. And if that goes well, then try beans, then try grains, right? Try some rice or quinoa, or things like that, and see how you do. And if you're doing well, then you can do things like make your own 3-day sourdough, you know, and maybe nixtamalize your own corn tortillas, or, you know, find someone who does that in the traditional way. Like you could try adding back some of these complex carbohydrates in traditional forms, right? Now I will say not everyone can do that. Some people can only add back some of those and maintain symptom remission. Some people can add back all of it. Some people really have to stay within those specific carbohydrate principles, like for the most part, you know, to maintain remission. But I think we have to prioritize like good health. Like there is no price on it, right? And you can eat a very delicious, nourishing diet without complex carbohydrates, or just the ones in moderation that you can tolerate and maintain that remission. So I hope that this was a really helpful overview. I'm going to try to put some lists up on the screen. Hopefully that worked as you're watching this and you can kind of screenshot. But if you want more help with this, you can get my book. I talk through this in detail. My ketogenic nervous system rebuilding diet in my book is within specific carbohydrate principles. And obviously the gut brain axis rebuilding diet that's in my book. And then the basic nervous system rebuilding diet is the one that does include some of the complex carbohydrates, to see if you can add those back and use that as a maintenance diet. But you can back in too. You know, I think that's really important. You don't have to start at the initial soup, phase 1, or intra gaps. You can really start, you know, at the end and work back too. That's actually what I did, because I would get such intense detox reactions whenever I eliminated anything and went back a step. So make sure you do check out my video on Herxheimer reactions to be prepared for anything like that. But again, if we can get in early, if we can start implementing these principles with your family now, it's going to break the cycle of generational chronic illness, generational trauma, and really you could not give yourself or your family a bigger gift. So I hope this was helpful, and take care.